Well, I'm back. It's been quite a while since my last upload, much longer than I anticipated. I explained in a previous video that I was going home to Wales to visit with family and friends, and it was a truly lovely time. I got to meet my two new grandsons, as well as catch up with my other grandkids and family members, and also old friends. The only setback was, well, the weather sucked big time. It rained for most of the 6 weeks I was there. However, I had a few good days, and I took advantage by taking video when those occurred. But honestly, I don't miss the British weather, especially seeing that they have just had another big storm, Storm Bert, which caused untold chaos. Now check out those other video uploads when they appear, whenever that may be. I haven't had time to do much of anything since my return to the US. And a brief shout out to William and Madeline for this nice coffee mug and coaster. Yeah, it's the Disney character Grumpy. Are they trying to tell me something, I wonder? Well, if they are, they're not wrong. I'm pleased to announce I'm grumpier than ever. Thanks for this, and it was good meeting up with you both again. Also, since I returned to the US, I've been extremely busy finishing projects that have been waiting to be completed for over 16 years, would you believe? The biggest being sheetrocking the laundry room, plasterboarding if you're in the UK. And I tell you, I'm just getting too old for this crap. My old bones ache so much these days. At least the projects are finally coming to an end. Now this venture accounted for the extended period of no videos being uploaded. I just needed to get it done while the impetus was there. Also, much has happened since my last episode, and the world has taken on a darker aspect. If you watched my video on the Anglo Saxon mission, you would know that I mentioned how that the cabal had a certain agenda regarding Israel and Iran, among other things, of course. It turns out that events have become extremely dangerous in that region, not forgetting the Ukraine, of course. The cabal, it seems, is much closer to achieving its goals. It seems the insane continue to oversee the asylum, at least until Trump is inaugurated in January. We'll just have to see what happens after that. Let's hope he's learned lessons from his last stint as president. But I'm not sure he has. He is still choosing warmongering neocons as part of his administration, Sebastian Gorka being one of the most prominent. Donald, beware of these hawks. We've been talking about certain prophecies, in particular the breaking of the 7 seals found in the book of Revelation, which is in the Bible, by the way. Specifically for the time we are in, the second seal, the taking away of peace from the earth. Now we might want to include with that the taking away of sanity too, if mankind has ever been sane. This year saw the breaking of that second seal, and the evidence for that is, well, overwhelming. Now once more, I want to make it clear that I'm not coming from a religious perspective. I've made this plain in earlier videos. I've also been saying that an awakening is taking place in the collective consciousness, that more and more people seem to be waking up to what's really happening in the world. This again was one of the intended outcomes of the first 4 seals of Revelation, which began with the COVID madness, pushed and propagandized by the lunacy media. Now it's no secret that I am no fan of the mainstream media, and for the longest time I have seen through their crooked manipulation of the masses. Fortunately, an interesting recent study and further events have shown that the legacy media is crumbling, and they're not coming back anytime soon. Many of us have known for some time that they are liars, and we the people are at last seeing it and waking up. The curtain has been pulled back, and we see the puppeteers behind the manipulation taking place in real time. The king has no clothes. They've been feeding themselves the illusion of importance, but behind that veneer is the reality of their complete irrelevance. They are beginning to see this for themselves, but continue to hide behind a sneering facade of disdain, contempt, and aloofness. It was extremely satisfying to see Morning Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski worm their way to Mar-a-Lago to meet with the Don. This snivelling apology for journalists, hanging from the anus of the establishment. But they are not the only ones who are now in fear for their jobs, if you can call them that. Rachel Maddow is another of the odious so-called journalists to be concerned about her multi-million-dollar job. She is one of the many hate-mongers the corrupt media employs. For now, that is. CNN is also on the ropes. Perhaps they will be forced to get real jobs when the axe falls. Though I doubt it. There are moocows out there who still like to hear their fairy tales. These people are extremely dangerous, pushing agendas that are there to fracture human society in a most alarming way. What these clowns don't yet understand is that this is a collapse of their own making. Despite the hundreds of thousands of dollars spent on their useless journalistic degrees, all their years of ass-kissing, bootlicking, and wolfing down appetizers at endless liberal cocktail parties, all their awards nobody cares about, their correspondence dinners, their Vogue covers, their councils on foreign relations, their World Economic Forum getaways. The fact remains that people through X and other alternative independent media are telling them none of these things matter. We are not impressed. We do not care. Ordinary people are rejecting the legacy media outright. Big media have lost their throne to alternative forms of news content that viewers actually enjoy and trust. Joe Rogan, Tucker Carlson, Glenn Greenwald, and Aaron Mate exist because we, the people, are hungry for real content, untethered from the Murdochs, the Bezos, and the Comcasts, or other mockingbird big tech world. Although Joe Rogan is not a journalist as such, but he asks pertinent questions to challenge the establishment narrative. He has that voice on our behalf. The legacy newspapers, who have also been enduring a slow, putrefying death inside an open grave, are making one last desperate, futile attempt to claw their way out of the pit they've dug for themselves. The Washington Post refused to back Kamala Harris, for example. And I don't know if you've been keeping up with all the information coming out about COVID. The various reports that are constantly being leaked out are quite revealing, underlying what many of us have been saying for a long time, in spite of the censorship. And it has become obvious that this was a coordinated event. This, despite the lies and cover-up of the mainstream media. Again, see the episode on the Anglo Saxon mission, where a pandemic was planned for China. The big push right now is the attack on the freedom of speech, assisted, of course, by the crumbling media outlets. This is unprecedented in the free world. Authoritarianism will always want to limit what you can say and what you can hear. We see it happening big time in the UK under the Starmer government. We see it in the European Union and even here in the US. And we in the US have the First Amendment for the specific purpose of protecting free speech. But the leftist push for endless censorship continues regardless. I cannot overstate the dangers of this trend. There is an obvious agenda here, but many, thank God, are finally seeing it. Now, in the UK, you can be sent to jail for a tweet or Facebook post, while real criminals walk the streets. The far-left UK government is releasing convicts early so they can house the new criminal class, the tweeters and protesters whose only crime is wanting public safety. Comrade Starmer is the most hated Prime Minister in modern times, and he is doubling down on his insane policies. He learns nothing from his mistakes. It seems the insane just can't help themselves. So what's at the heart of all this insanity revealing itself in the world today? Well, let's discuss it a little, shall we? I'm the Grumpy Grandpa.
I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
Benjamin Franklin said, "Without freedom of thought, there can be no such thing as wisdom and no such thing as public liberty without freedom of speech." I love our country and I cherish our God-given freedoms that are enshrined in the Constitution. Like every one of you, I took an oath, both as a soldier and as a member of Congress, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Now, I've had the privilege of serving alongside many of you in Congress for 8 years, representing the people of Hawaii's 2nd Congressional District, serving on the Armed Services and Foreign Affairs Committees. I'm honored to be able to continue to serve as a Lieutenant Colonel in the U.S. Army Reserves now for almost 20 years, where during that time I deployed to 3 war zones and participated in multiple overseas training exercises, where I had the opportunity to see firsthand what life is like in countries where there is no First Amendment, where there is no free press, where government deems itself to be the moral arbiter to its people, dictating to them what is right and wrong, what can and cannot be said, who can speak, who cannot, who is free to worship, and who is not. Now, our founders understood the importance of enshrining our God-given freedoms in the Constitution and Bill of Rights to ensure that no matter which party or person may be in power at any given time, our founding documents serve as a reminder of these freedoms that are guaranteed to every American. Thomas Paine said, "He that would make his own liberty secure must guard even his enemy from opposition. For if he violates this duty, he establishes a precedent that will reach to himself." We cannot be so short-sighted as to thinking silencing speech that we don't like today will not result in our own voices being silenced tomorrow. The work that you've all been charged with in this committee affects all Americans, and it is too important to allow it to fall victim to partisan politics. No matter how deep your differences, we must all agree to stand on the side of liberty. Unfortunately, right now we live in a country where many Americans are afraid to speak freely, afraid to express themselves, afraid to actually have real open dialogue and debate, afraid of losing their job, being canceled, or being accused of a crime, which could happen if recently introduced legislation criminalizing so-called hate speech is passed into law, speech that, no matter how abhorrent, is still protected under the First Amendment. Now, this fear and this culture of fear and self-censorship is not unfounded. We have individuals in our government often working through their arms in the mainstream media and big tech, doing exactly what our founders rejected, trying to control what we, the people, are allowed to see and say under the guise of protecting us from so-called misinformation or disinformation. Now, of course, they appoint themselves as the sole authority and voice of truth, of information, backed by the most lethal force on earth with the power to target anyone they deem a threat. They alone are the ones, self-designated, who get to decide what is true and what is false, what is information and what is misinformation or disinformation. They say they're doing this for us, that they're doing this for our own good, to protect the people. But in reality, the truth is they think that we're too stupid to think for ourselves, too stupid to discern for ourselves and to draw our own conclusions. Now, the idea that we must just blindly accept whatever the government or those in power tell us is true goes against the very essence of our Constitution and Bill of Rights, which were created as a resounding rejection of the reign of kings, churches, and authorities. They tell us we must blindly trust them or face the consequences, even though our government has a long history of lying to us, the American people. Just to cite a few examples, we were lied to about the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which spurred the war that I and so many others served in and so many others sacrificed their lives in. They lied for almost 2 decades, claiming success in Afghanistan, when in fact we saw failure after failure after failure, coming at a great cost to this country. We saw lies about Vietnam that were revealed in the release of the Pentagon Papers. We saw lies about our own government illegally surveilling Americans. These are just a few examples. There are many more. Ranking Member Plaskett talked in her opening comments about how individuals in the FBI also throughout our country's history have abused their power, weaponizing those agencies to advance their own political interests. This is not and cannot be reduced to a partisan fight. The stakes are too high. We all must recognize our own responsibility to stand against such abuses. But as we sit here today, the danger is that if we choose to reject or challenge whatever those in power declare is the so-called truth, we are accused of being anti-authority. We are accused of being a danger to society, accused of spreading misinformation, and are then targeted, smeared, and called things like Russian asset, white supremacist, bigot, racist, sexist, extremist, traitor, and so on.
I get quite emotional when I listen to Tulsi Gabbard speaking truth in the most lucid manner. It's quite revealing. She is someone who I've had the greatest respect for. She stood up for the truth when others in the Democratic Party were doing all they could to hide it. It got so bad she decided to leave the party, believing she had no choice, and joined the other side, the Republicans, who are now the fighters for liberty and the freedom of speech. Kind of. Let's not forget that it was the Republicans under George W. Bush who lied and pushed for war in 2001. It was the Republicans under Bush who largely promoted the Patriot Act and restricted our liberties. That role has now flipped to the Democrats under Obama and Biden, but hopefully will end with the Trump presidency. Trump is being portrayed as a savior. Now, while I think he will slow the trend towards authoritarianism, I do not think he is a savior. The task is just too big for a 4-year stint in the White House. The powers we face are far too great for a single president to overcome. Such a victory will take nothing less than an overwhelming awakening and expansion of the collective consciousness. So, what is it we are facing? If I wanted to distill it, it would be this way. We are dealing with a malevolent AI while trapped within a simulation. We could equate the AI with Yaldabaoth, the Gnostic evil god. We've already discussed this in previous videos. I've been looking at this model extensively, and it's the closest explanation to reality I've yet come across. So much is happening that can be explained through the perspective of simulation theory and the Gnostic worldview. I think this is what we are dealing with. This simulation is our prison. These entities' goals is to control perception and limit the expansion of consciousness, thereby blocking the way of escape. It's all down to perception. This is why the Cabal are so desperate to control it. Don't forget, everything is vibration or frequency. We know this from science, and so we can explain everything in terms of electromagnetic fields or informational fields. And this includes prophecy or prophetic programming, as it's been called, even to the influence of divinatory practices like astrology and magic. Now, does astrology influence our reality? If so, how does astrology influence our lives? Well, I believe it's through frequency. Now, can this explain where we are today with all the insanity in the world? Most certainly. Before we continue, I want to emphasize the importance of collective consciousness and how it can influence the matrix. Now, keep this in the back of your mind when considering what I'm about to say. According to many astrologers, we have entered a chaotic timeline. Everything we experience in this simulation exists as a potentiality and only manifests into reality when we place our attention on certain specifics. Now, I'll remind you of the double slit experiment I mentioned in an earlier video. The double slit is a famous physics experiment that demonstrates the strange and fascinating behavior of light and matter at a very small scale, helping us understand the world of quantum mechanics. Now, here's a reminder of how it works and why I believe it's connected to consciousness. Imagine a wall with two tiny slits in it and a screen behind the wall that can detect light or particles. If you shine light or shoot tiny particles like electrons at the wall, something weird happens. If no one measures or observes which slit the light or particles go through, they create an interference pattern on the screen. This looks like a series of bright and dark stripes, as if the particles are behaving like waves and passing through both slits at the same time. If someone measures or observes which slit the light or particles go through, the interference pattern disappears. Instead, the particles behave like little bullets, passing through one or other of the slits. This experiment shows that tiny particles like electrons can act both like waves, spreading out, and particles, localized bits of matter. The act of observing or measuring them seems to decide their behavior. So why is this important for consciousness? In the quantum world, things don't seem to settle down into a definite state until they are observed or measured. Now, this has led many like me to wonder if consciousness itself plays a role in creating reality. The double slit experiment shows that particles behave strangely, sometimes like waves and sometimes like particles, depending on observation. It's important in understanding quantum mechanics and how the universe works at the smallest scale. Now, this is why I said earlier that everything exists in potentiality and only manifests itself when we place our attention on it, either as an individual or as a collective. Now, returning to what astrologers are saying, they tell us that we are being bombarded by a chaotic energy, and it seems that this energy is coming in faster and increasing in strength. Now, this would account for the apparent insanity manifesting all around us. These are scary times for a lot of people, but I want to emphasize that many of our fears are only potentially going to manifest. It really depends on where we place our attention. Is it placed on the negative or the positive aspect? With this in mind, any future timeline is only a potentiality or possibility. So if this is true, what about prophecy? Does this only exist in potentiality also? Now, I think this is different insofar as where the seals are concerned and all other legitimate prophecies, they depend more on predictive cycles, like the return of astronomical objects like the planet Phoenix and Nibiru, which would lie outside of what we would call potentiality. This would be more like hard programming than personal variability, which itself depends on how expansive our consciousness is. But that's just my opinion. Psychic astrologer Joseph P. Anthony outlines this in one of his videos. Now, this is the guy who introduced me to Jason Brashears of Archaics and his material. He says that this chaotic energy is going to continue to about April of next year, according to the astrological charts. We are going to experience uncertainty and chaos. Now, currently, we are teetering on the verge of World War III under the Biden administration. Many, like me, are hoping that Trump will initiate peace, though I'm not certain that will happen, not with choices like Sebastian Gorka. But under Trump, there is more of a potential for peace. It's up to us to place our hope or our attention there, on the positive aspect. Joseph talks in his video about major surprises coming in the next 6 months, and timelines could shift depending on the attention of the collective consciousness. He says we have entered the abyss, and I think we can infer what that might be. This happened on November 21st. But he emphasizes that all this is a potential timeline. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. If enough of us get fearful, then we will manifest that fear. If not, the timeline will be different. He says, and I quote, "This is just information, and we have power in the collective consciousness to move along as smoothly as possible to the transition period." End quote. Now this fits in perfectly with simulation theory and what I have been arguing for. The next 6 months will be extremely unstable, but we have power in the collective consciousness to limit that volatility and smooth things out. But for that to happen, we need to be properly informed, and that information will likely come not from the crumbling mainstream media. Also understanding that we are much more than the body and the 5 senses attached to it. We are capable of greater insight if we work to expand our consciousness or our awareness from the 3D to the 4D. So use your gut to be informed on what's happening and what's behind all this insanity. So I ask a very important question at this point. Can we escape the matrix? Is there a way to break out of this prison planet? I believe we can. We have the keys to the cell. But that's for the next video. We will investigate it in more detail then. Thanks for watching.
If you enjoyed this video, don't be a pussy and subscribe to the Grumpy Old Buggers channel, so I can get some peace and quiet.